Negotiating, it's one of those topics that you often hear about, sometimes get involved in, right? I mean, you've been to job interviews, haven't you, Emily, and negotiated?
Yeah, and so it stresses me out. And one thing that I've learned over time is you're not going to get what you don't ask for, is one thing. But it is key that you know the zone of possible agreement for both parties, and it's in your best interest to do some research. I said the zone of possible agreement. That's ZOPA. ZOPA. There's a great book called Negotiation Genius that digs more deeply into this. Let's talk about it. So let's say we're negotiating with someone for an hourly rate. And we know, we did some research, or maybe just market rates out there, and we know this person, the least that they're going to want is $50 per hour. They won't take anything less. It would be insulting for us to offer up, hey, we'll pay you $40. They'd be mad. They probably would talk poorly about our organization. And we know with our budget, the most that we're going to pay is $100 an hour. So our zone of possible agreement is in between this. So we know right off the bat, we can have an agreement that it will work. If we were to do this research and we realized there's just no way, the most they'll take is $100,000 and the most we'll pay is $50, the least they would take and the most, we would say, okay, well, we can't hire this resource. So that is a zone of possible agreement, but we also want to anchor. And most people say you should never start the negotiation because now you're anchoring it. And when you anchor something, if this person anchored it at $60 an hour, they can go up from that. But they don't really want to anchor it at $60 an hour, right? They know our zone of possible agreement. They don't know, but they'd have an idea that the zone of possible agreement, the most we'll pay is $100. So they would want to anchor this at, I'll take $150 an hour. That might also cause some problems because I might go, what? That's ridiculous, and have a bad idea about the way they work or their reputation. Of course, there's so much that has to do with interpersonal skills in these agreements as well. Likewise, we wouldn't want to anchor it and start this at, I'll pay you $100 an hour, because we're not going to be able to go lower than that. All right, I'll pay you $60 an hour. That won't work. So two things to keep in mind that are very simple to do is to realize, do some research, what's the ZOPA, and make sure it's anchored at the appropriate place. I mean, there's so much more involved in negotiation. I mean, Phil, this is an example of something that is basically a win-lose almost type of thing. I don't want to say lose, but there's definitely an outcome. But there are other things you can do in a negotiation, right? We might be able to bring in other elements to negotiate. People do that all the time. Right,
absolutely. I'd just like to read one quick line from the Project Management Essentials book from Praizion. On page 455, it says, negotiating does not always have to conclude with both sides losing. Both sides should come away from the negotiation with good feelings about the outcome without one side feeling cheated or remorseful.
So maybe we agree to pay them $50 an hour, and they don't feel great about that, but they might have come back and said, what about bonuses? Certainly, we can pay you bonuses, or we can throw in a company car if people still do that anymore. It depends on where you live, of course. So that is an example of making the pie bigger, and really that's a good tactic for anybody who is doing negotiation. Think about, I might have a fixed budget here, but I really want this resource, or I really want to work for this organization. What else could make me happy? Maybe a few weeks of vacation thrown in there would be good for everybody.
Well, I'll keep that in mind. Hopefully they can make my pie bigger when next I negotiate. Well, thank you very much for your audience. Remember, if you've got any more questions, visit Praizion.com and send an email to info@praizion.com or support@praizion.com.